Hello and welcome to the second video in the PDF Knit Along series. In this video I'm going to demonstrate the cast on. Now before you begin the cast on, you should have completed the worksheets. Well, I showed you how to do that in the last video, so you've got your numbers. And then you should make sure you are familiar with Judy's Magic Cast On. If it's been a while since you've worked it, refresh your memory. You should watch this video several times, and then you should make sure you've read the directions. There's plenty of support diagrams. Before you sit down to begin, make sure you've got a pretty good idea of what's going to happen with this. You don't want to start trying to figure it out on the fly. And finally, you should give yourself a comfortable block of time to sit down and get started. I figure a couple of hours anyway. You want to sit down, you want to get cast on and work the first few rounds before you put your work away. So without further ado, here is how you get cast on for your pretty darn fabulous sweater. The cast on for the sweater is Judy's Magic Cast On. I'm going to be demonstrating it here in a moment, but if you are already familiar with Judy's Magic Cast On, there are a few things that are a little different for this pattern. The first is that it's really helpful to use two completely different needles. It's much easier to keep track of which needle you're working on if the two needles are easily distinguishable. The second is you want to work the cast on with the longer of the two needles on the bottom. And the third is the cast on calls for you to pull out a very long tail, work a slip knot, and put it on one of the needles. What I prefer to do is hold two separate strands of the yarn that you're going to cast on with and work a slip knot holding both of them together. And then put that slip knot around both needles. And this does not count as a stitch. All right. It is important to know that your cast on begins in the middle of your pattern repeat, assuming that you want things to be symmetrical around the center. So you're going to work out in both directions from the center if you are working in stripes. So here is how I work Judy's Magic Cast On for this garment. So I've got the two strands joined together in a slip knot around both needles. Okay, so insert your index finger and thumb between the two strands and then rotate your hand out. Okay, so the thumb will put a loop around the top needle. The index finger will put a loop around the bottom needle. So now you've cast on one stitch onto each needle. All right, so the thumb always casts onto the top. The index finger always casts onto the bottom. So bottom goes to top, top goes to bottom. All right, and with each pass you are putting a new stitch onto each needle. So I'm working the cast on with a strand of yarn pulled from the center of two different balls. But if you happen to be working your cast on with, like say, a strand from the outside of a ball and the inside of a center pull ball, you'll want to know that the thumb strand is the one that's going to be continued, that you're going to continue with. So you might want to check to make sure that this one is the center pull strand. All right, and you just continue like this for the number of stitches as called for in the pattern. All right, so I've just cast on my final stitch with Judy's Magic Cast On. All right, so the next step is to flip the needles. So the long needle is now on top. Pull the lower needle so that the stitches are on the cable. And then use the other end of the upper needle to work across the row. Okay, so I've knit the top needle stitches until I have arrived at marker 1. You're going to slip marker 1, purl the next stitch, and then knit until you get to one stitch before marker 2. And you purl this stitch before marker 2, and then you knit to the end of the row. next you're going to slip all the stitches from the end of needle 2 to marker 3 onto a lifeline to hold them. Notice how as I'm slipping them, I am untwisting them. Judy's Magic Cast On will twist half of the stitches, and so this is going to make sure they are ready for me to work when I come back and do the sleeves in step 5. Once you've threaded your first lifeline, slip down to the other end of needle 2 and run a second lifeline, transferring all of the stitches from that end until you get to marker 4. And while you are in this neighborhood, you can cut the second strand of yarn used for the cast on. You're not going to need that connected to the ball anymore. Okay, so here's needle 1. This is needle 1, and this is needle 2. And the stitches that were on needle 2, kind of back to back with needle 1, have been transferred to a lifeline until you get about 1/3 of the way down the line. Okay. So what you're going to do now is most likely you have to replace the marker. This would be marker 3. It always seems to go walkabout while you're transferring stitches onto lifelines. And what you're going to do is slide the stitches down to the end of needle 1 and transfer about half of them off onto needle 2. And your pattern will tell you exactly how many stitches to transfer over. All right. So these aren't the stitches that have the lifeline running through them. These are the stitches that you've just worked. Now I'm going to go to the other end of needle 1. And once again, it's got stitches that are live on needle 1 and then stitches that are being held by a lifeline. And you're going to take needle 2 and transfer off about half of the stitches between the end of the row and the marker. And again, your pattern will tell you how many stitches to transfer between the two. So when you're done with all of this, each needle will have approximately the same number of stitches. So it's quite possible at this point you've got a snarled mess. Take a minute to separate all of your strands out, make sure you know where your working yarn is located, separate out all of your lifeline strands, and do a little bit of housekeeping. So here's needle number 2. I have half of the stitches transferred from needle 1 to needle 2, so that each needle has approximately the same number of stitches. And the working yarn is down here at the marker. And the next stitches that need to be worked are these, which are going to be across the back. So the last thing we need to do is to take one end of needle 2 and use it to transfer stitches from the other end so that you can continue working the stitches on needle 2 across the back. Alright, so I'm once more at marker 3. This is the last stitch I worked on needle number 1. And the remainder of the stitches on needle number 2 are going to be worked through their back loops. So beginning with a purl 1. And then you knit through the back loop until you get to one stitch before marker 4. You purl that stitch, and marker 4 is the beginning of the round. At this point I've worked the stitches on needle 2 between markers 3 and 4. All of these have become untwisted, and I'm now at marker 4. And marker 4 is the beginning of the round. When you work this first stitch on marker 4, which is a slip slip knit, you begin a shaping round. But before you work that stitch, check and confirm that your stitches have not gotten twisted. This is just like joining to work in the round. You want to make sure that you don't have a twist in those stitches. Okay, I'm good. So I begin my first round with a slip slip knit. At this point I'm still working the shaping round. This is marker 4, this is my slip slip knit, and I have worked to the end of needle 2. So what I'm going to do now is completely stop working needle 2 and pick up both ends of needle 1 and work all of the needle 1 stitches. and work, I'm going to work needle 1 stitches till I get to marker 1. Also, this is a really good time to take the ends of your lifeline and knot them together, because if these lifelines come out, you are in a world of hurt. Okay, I'm working the shaping round, and this is at marker 2. I wanted to show you how to do the increases. They're lifted increases. You're going to go into the stitch 2 stitches below the live stitch and lift it up onto the needle and knit it. Alright, so that's a lifted left increase. Then work the purl. To make the lifted right increase, go into the stitch below the live stitch on the left needle. You can either put it on the stitch and you can either put the stitch on the needle and work it, or just go ahead and pull the loop through. And that's how you work a lifted right. Alright, this is how things look after you've worked about 10 rounds. Alright, so this is needle 2 and this is needle 1. And on needle 2 you're working 4 decreases each shaping round. So this is where the raglan shaping is going to be coming in, and you're going to be working to the neck edge here. And these sleeve openings are going to kind of ratchet up as you continue to work the repeat of round 1 and round 2. All right, and down here is needle 1, and the increases are being worked on each side of markers 1 and 2. So over here. And this is going to come down and become part of the front edge. Now, there's no question that things are a little awkward to begin with. The stitches are difficult to shift around the needle, but it's usually about 4 rounds or so, and things will start smoothing out for you. So just keep at it. Once you've finished your cast on, you just have a 2-round repeat. 1 plain round and then 1 shaping round. And on the shaping round you work increases where indicated in the pattern on needle 1 and decreases where indicated in the pattern on needle 2. And continue until you have the number of stitches between the 2 neck edge markers that are called for in the pattern. And next time I'll show you what happens to finish the front. Alright, until then, happy knitting!